Picture this. It's 1848, and a fire is catching all across Europe. I mean, from Paris to Vienna, Berlin to Budapest. People are rising up and they're demanding change. They called it the springtime of nations. It was this incredible moment where it looked like the old world of kings and empires was about to be washed away for good. But what really happened? Let's get into it.
Here's the tricky part. Most of these revolutions, they were crushed, and crushed pretty fast, within a year or so. So you'd think they were a total failure, right? And if they failed, why on earth are we still talking about them? Well, that is the big question we're going to tackle. How did this single, chaotic year manage to change the course of European history forever?
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why Europe was basically a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. Then we'll watch the dominoes fall as the revolution spreads like wildfire. After that, we'll dig into why these movements didn't stick the landing in the short term. And finally, this is the most important part, we'll uncover the incredible, lasting legacy they left behind.
Okay, first things first, what created this perfect storm for revolution? It wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful mix of really deep problems that had been simmering just under the surface of society for years.
Think of it like this. On the economic front, you had a disaster. Bad harvests, the potato blight, people were starving. Politically, everyone was just fed up with kings having all the power. They wanted basic rights and a say in their government. Socially, the gap between the super rich and the desperately poor was just massive. And then you throw two more ingredients into this explosive mix, the powerful new idea of nationalism and all these revolutionary ideas about liberty and freedom spreading everywhere.
Let's just zoom in on nationalism for a second, because this one was a real game changer. Imagine you're German or Italian, living in one of dozens of tiny little states. This idea was a dream of finally becoming one unified, strong country. Or imagine you're Hungarian or Czech, living under the rule of the Austrian Empire. For you, nationalism was this powerful cry for freedom. This idea that a people should have their own nation was a force that the old kings just couldn't put back in the bottle.
So, with all that pressure building up, all it took was a single spark to set the whole continent on fire. And that spark? Well, it came from a place it so often did in European history, Paris. So in France, you had this guy, King Louis Philippe, and he had become super unpopular. He was widely seen as a king for the rich bankers and industrialists, completely ignoring the fact that so many working-class people were unemployed and struggling. I mean, the stage was absolutely set for an explosion.
And boy, did it explode. In February of '48, the government tried to ban political gatherings. That was the last straw. Protests erupted into full-blown riots, and in just a few days, the king was gone. Just like that. A new republic was declared. But that unity didn't last. By June, the new government turned its army on the radical workers, crushing them. And by the end of the year, France had elected Napoleon's own nephew, Louis Napoleon, who, well, spoiler alert, would soon kill the republic and make himself emperor.
You can just imagine. The news from Paris spreads like wildfire, and it totally electrifies the German states. Over there, the revolutionaries had two main goals. One, they wanted liberal reforms, freedom of the press, that kind of thing. But the bigger dream, the main event, was to unite the 39 separate German states into one powerful German nation. So representatives from all over Germany actually got together. They met at the Frankfurt Parliament, and they drafted a constitution for a brand new unified Germany. They then offered the crown to the King of Prussia, Frederick William IV, and his response tells you everything you need to know about why this failed. He rejected it with this legendary line, basically saying he wasn't going to take a crown offered to him by commoners. And with that one arrogant refusal, the dream of a liberal, united Germany was dead, for the time being.
Now, if you think that was complicated, let's turn to the Austrian Empire, because this was on a whole other level. You basically had two revolutions happening at the exact same time. In the capital, Vienna, you had liberals demanding a constitution, pretty similar to what was happening in Germany. But all across the empire, you had different groups, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, using the chaos to fight for their own national independence. It was a total crisis.
And at first, their success was just breathtaking. Protests in Vienna actually forced the symbol of the old conservative order, Chancellor Metternich, to flee for his life. In Hungary, a fiery leader named Lajos Kossuth led a full-on war for independence. It looked like the empire was finished. But it wasn't. The monarchy regrouped its armies and, this is absolutely crucial, it got help from the Tsar of Russia, who sent his army in to brutally crush the Hungarians. The old order was put back in place with pure force.
So we're starting to see a pattern here, right? This incredible initial success followed by a total crushing failure. And that happened pretty much everywhere. So the big question we have to ask is, why? Why did this movement that swept the entire continent that seemed so powerful just collapse?
Well, it really boils down to a few key things. For starters, the revolutionaries themselves weren't on the same page. Liberals who just wanted a constitution had very different goals from nationalists who wanted to redraw the map of Europe, or from workers who wanted social reforms. Then, the middle class, the very people who often started these revolts, got cold feet. They got scared that the radical workers would take things too far. And finally, let's not forget, the old monarchies still had the professional armies, and they weren't afraid to use them or to call on their royal buddies for help.
So, a failure. Case closed, right? End of story? No, not at all. This is where the story gets really interesting. Because even in that failure, the revolutions of 1848 planted the seeds for the very future of Europe. What happened in the short term is not the whole picture.
You really have to look at it from two different angles. Short term, yeah, it was a political failure. The kings came back, unity was crushed. But the long-term impact, that's a completely different story. The ideas of democracy were now out in the open. Feudalism, serfdom, was abolished for good in places like Austria and Germany. And that dream of national unity, it was now absolutely unstoppable.
You want proof? Remember that German dream of unification? The one that was shot down when the king refused a crown from the gutter? Well, just over 20 years later, in 1871, it became a reality. It wasn't forged by liberals in a parliament, but by the conservative Prussian state itself, who realized they couldn't ignore the power of nationalism any longer.
And this is the real legacy, the big takeaway. That old conservative system that had ruled Europe since Napoleon's defeat, it was shattered, done, forever. Even though the monarchs came back, they now had to deal with parliaments, constitutions, and the press. 1848 is the year when the people, as a group, became a permanent force in politics that could never be ignored again.
Okay, so let's just put it all together one last time. 1848 was this massive, continent-wide wave of uprisings. It was driven by poverty and these powerful new ideas of liberalism and nationalism. And while yes, they were crushed in the moment, their long-term legacy was nothing less than the complete transformation of Europe's political landscape.
You know, if you remember just one thing, let it be this. 1848 was a political failure, but it was an ideological success. The armies of the revolutionaries might have lost in the battlefield, but the ideas they were fighting for, liberty, democracy, national identity, those ideas had won the war for the future.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The kings and emperors restored their power with armies and cannons. But can you ever really kill an idea once it's taken root in the minds of millions? Well, the rest of the story of the 19th and 20th centuries in Europe pretty clearly suggests the answer is no.